Greetings, Vault Hunters, and welcome to Echoes from the Borderlands, the podcast where we explore the iconic Borderlands franchise through conversations with the writers, devs, artists, and others who are responsible for its creation and its success. I'm your host, Joel Watson, and today we are talking about choices and how the choices we make have lasting effects on the outcome of future events. Our choices will be remembered, and they will affect how we are treated by NPCs during our various interactions. So let's talk about the choices in Tales from the Borderlands with writer Anthony Birch and managing director of Gearbox Narrative, Dr. Lynn Joyce. Welcome.
Hi.
Hello.
Tales from the Borderlands was developed by Telltale Games in partnership with Gearbox and 2K. The first episode was released in November of 2014. It received particular praise for its strong characterization, emotional depth, creative set pieces, humorous writing, and unexpected pathos. Unlike the Borderlands shooter games, Tales from the Borderlands is a storytelling adventure where players choose how the story plays out. There's twists and turns that are dependent on player choices. When you were creating a branching narrative game as opposed to an action-driven game, like all the other Borderlands games, is it safe to say, Lynn, I'm going to ask you, because I bet you have spicy opinions on this. Is it safe to say, up until this point, Borderlands is driven by action, or is it a partnership between action and story?
I would hope to say always the latter. Now, if you take the genre of your standard Borderlands game, it is a looter shooter. The verbs are right there for you. So we are usually meant to be looting or shooting, and most of the action is driving you to be doing those things. But that action has to come from somewhere. We have to apply a reason to why we would want to do that, or a motivation to why we want to do that, context. And that is going to come from story. Story is what's going to bring context to the world and to all of those verbs. The same is true of a narrative game. It's just which thing is more in focus at a given moment, right? Is it the mechanical action of pressing the buttons on the controller to jump or to strafe or to shoot your gun, right? Like whatever these things are. And that might be in focus for a time. Or are you focusing on some other feature? Are you focusing on character development? Are you focusing on plot? So I think the best games always keep both in balance. And that's really what we should be trying to achieve. Balance.
Both of you have written on the Borderlands franchise wide. Anthony, Borderlands 2. Lynn, Borderlands 3?
Yes.
So,
DLCs.
And DLCs. Do you feel like Borderlands is unique among the shooter genre for its level of character and story, and that's what led to something like Tales?
Yeah, I think it maybe not in terms of how much character and story there are, but in terms of the tone. Borderlands is around 2, which is when the deal got made to do Tales from the Borderlands. It sort of stood apart because it was a little bit more funny, a little bit more idiosyncratic. And I remember when the first talks were happening about, like, hey, can we do a Telltale Borderlands game? It was actually a little contentious because some people were like, can we support that level of narrative depth that a Telltale game has? Because the ultimate story that gets to the players is compared to the stuff that we know internally and how we think about the world and the story Bibles and stuff that we have. Comparatively, what the player sees is a very small slice of that. So one could easily come away from Borderlands 2 going like, that was fun and stuff, but like it's probably a shallow world and there's not that much to explore. It was just about, people trying to find vaults and stuff like that. How much could there really be to it? But Telltale saw what we hoped other people would see, which is that actually this can be a really cool universe for exploring character-centric stories.
Lynn, have you found when writing Borderlands characters in other media that there were ones that you wanted to be able to spend more time with?
Yes, always. I don't know that there are many Borderlands characters that I wouldn't want to spend more time with. I think the go-to...
Oh, Claptrap.
But I think that the go-to for me would always be Vault Hunters, right? That I often, though we are playing the Vault Hunters, we're not learning as much about their background, their history, what they were doing before they got into vault hunting, why they became vault hunters, right? So we don't get to explore or what they're doing when they're not vault hunting, right? So,
What's everybody up to on the weekends when the vault hunting's
right,
done? Yeah.
right. After you open the vault, like how do you kick back? Yeah.
Well, Borderlands historically follows that path a lot, where the characters that we played actively in one game become NPCs in another game, but then get more spotlight in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I think there we're always like how can we spend more time? Like where can we bring these characters back? And by converting them to NPCs, we can take deeper dives with them. But we also have really beloved NPCs. And so even take, for example, Fran, right? Which Fran was a character name dropped in BL3 and then becomes a protagonist in New Tales. And so that sort of Fran was not a prominent character in BL3, but to even just say like our world is big. There's so much happening in the Borderlands universe. There's so many people living lives here. And to be able to just take something, a small mention, and then bring that character to life, I do think our universe is rich enough to support that.
Yeah, you're planting seeds
endlessly.
and then you're harvesting later.
Yeah, exactly.
With narrative games in general, if we go back a little bit, we've got things like the Sierra games, King's Quest, Monkey Island. Is that do either of you have experience with those types of games and those narrative first earlier PC games?
Oh yeah, I was a huge fan of all those Sierra games. Well, mainly Leisure Suit Larry because I was a pervy little kid.
Sure.
But yeah, I loved adventure games as a kid. And the second that Telltale brought back Sam & Max, I was one of the first people to actually. I think I reviewed those games when I was working at a games website. Yeah, but huge fan of Telltale for bringing those back into the forefront.
How about you, Lynn?
Yeah, same. I was lucky.
Leisure Shoot Larry.
Oh, I think I was lucky enough to grow up. My mom was a computer engineer, and so like we always had a computer in the house. So like growing up in the early 80s, I won't give exact year, right? I think like that put me in a lucky group. I wasn't just like the Macintosh at school. There was a computer at home as well, and like where you had to boot it up from DOS. And so I was playing games really early thanks to having access at home. I don't really remember not having access.
At those ages, did you ever recognize that those kinds of games were giving you a deeper story experience? Before, 3D games didn't take on, in my opinion, and I could be totally off on this, I haven't played every video game, it was late 90s, early 2000s was the first time where I went, oh, this game's going hard on story. This is not just, I'm the guy needs to run and shoot. Like, I was actually thinking about how deep, preparing for this episode and for this series, think about how deep and concerned we are about story, and how when I was young, when we were young, the box art would say, you're the red guy shoots the blue guy, go. And like that was it. Did those games resonate as having something to offer that wasn't there with other games?
Yeah, I mean, as Lynn was saying, like the verbs of a shooter can be shoot, and the verbs of Sam & Max were talk, were examine, were do a thing and get a dialogue reward. Every single thing you could do in Sam & Max had a bespoke, really funny line of dialogue that would react to the player in some way. So if you were looking to explore a narrative space, those were the best games to do that because everything that you poked and prodded would reward you with some form of narrative.
It did. It taught you to be curious.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a way that other games probably didn't.
I think it's also what's interesting, right, too, is if you go back and remember how many early games, like they came with the sort of paper insert, where if like the game couldn't itself deliver story context to you, you would find that in the pamphlet, right? And they're just like, we want to create the headcanon for you so that you can maintain it while playing the game. So, going back to like, this is why the red guy wants to shoot the blue guy, right?
It's because the aliens invaded. Yeah.
Right.
It was rarely more complicated than aliens have invaded. Someone named Zorg or Zargon or Zortan, something like that. So with that focus on narrative, stemming from that and moving into these Telltale games, what does this type of game offer a Borderlands player that they've yet to receive?
I mean, kind of like what Lynn was saying, you get to experience what people are like when they're not in a pure combat context. Like, we set up this world such that, like, okay, well, it's a corporatocracy where the corporations are involved and there's no world governments, and where people are being used as labor to try to find these alien vaults, and where guns are the most important currency and all that kind of stuff. And while that lends itself really well to a combat context, it also hypothetically is kind of a fun space western kind of context as well, where people are trying to go out of their way and take great risk and live on the frontier in order to get great rewards and stuff like that. And if, the genres of the Western have told us anything, or the genres of really any story about people trying to get rich have told us anything, it's that that's a really ripe area for narrative. And the idea of being able to get into the shoes of people who are not uber powerful vault hunters. But I remember we talked about in Telltale, not that I worked there, I remember that Telltale talked about how Tales from the Borderlands Season 1 was about Fiona and Reese going from level 0 to level 1. It was about nobodies becoming somebodies. And that story is a lot harder to tell in a video game where we want you to immediately feel powerful and have a gun and feel awesome. But in a narrative context where we can have you suffer constant setbacks, and those setbacks actually feel good rather than frustrating, it makes a lot more sense.
That's interesting. There is something about starting as a badass in a lot of modern games.
Yeah. We want you to, in a typical Borderlands game, we want you to feel good from the get-go. We want the gun to feel good in your hand. We want you to feel powerful. There's a reason that the first things that you shoot die in 1 or 2 hits. Whereas in Tales of the Borderlands, we wanted you to be aspiring to that level of power and to feel like, literally, Reese's first scene is you can either get angry and kick over a trash can or not, and no matter what you do, a klaxon comes out and they say, "Reese, you're now the janitor. You have to clean that up." Like, it's about rubbing the player's nose in how important they are, so that they feel motivated to take risks and put Reese and Sasha and Fiona in terrible danger to get out of the poorhouse.
I will add to the other thing that I think Telltale style games do well is they put player anxiety on much smaller things, right? It is that do I kick the trash can or not now has consequences, right? And it's bringing the focus down and the anxiety down into smaller conversations and spaces, but the consequences of those things loom larger, right? Then I have a gun, I solve problems with my gun, right? And so yeah, there is no power trip there. And so I like the anxiety that Telltale style games put on choices.
You did it.
I did it. I got it out. Yeah.
It's interesting because it refocuses the fantasy to something more grounded. You're not blowing up the universe or saving the universe. You're trying to develop positive relationships.
Exactly. Yes. And I think that is part of it. It's as much about the high stakes as it is the smaller stakes, and maintaining relationships with people and like the interpersonal skills, and that what you say matters and what you do matters. Again, beyond your more typical game verbs.
In terms of branching interactive narrative writing, you've both written linear video games, which do have an element of choice, but here you need to be aware of essentially multiple realities. You're writing a multiverse. Can we talk about the challenges therein, going from what you're used to that? I mean, it sounds infinitely complicated. And Lynn, don't you have a degree in this? Don't you have
a doctorate?
A doctorate, an advanced degree in this subject?
I do. Thank you for mentioning.
What a get! What a get for this podcast.
I do have a doctorate in interactive narrative systems design. So I came in to something like New Tales thinking about it from that systems perspective. The you are telling a story in a multiverse and how you do that. I think, I mean, like one of the more boring answer to it is you have to know all of the branches, like your major branches and your major diversions and plot points before you even start writing, right? There has to be a lot of discussion. There has to be a lot of outlining about what that can be. And then, you know, like what the project can sustain in terms of timeline and budget and all of those things. So you have to go in with a little less flexibility at that level. But when you get to the sort of, I love writing for interactive narrative games because for a writer, it's very freeing, right? Like often when we're writing something linear, you get just one way to do it, right? And you'll always be like, maybe the character should have said this, or maybe the character would want to act that way, right? But we have to keep forcing and funneling the characters in a particular direction. But when you get to dialogue choices in Telltale style games, we get to explore and we get to say, what are the versions of this character? For me, it is the sort of, there is a baseline Lynn, right, that you get on most days, right? But then
there's Dark Lynn.
Yeah, and then there's like really, really happy Lynn, the like, yes, I want to say yes to everything, Lynn. But we all vacillate, and these games allow us to do that and to play with those moments and really just to put that in the player's hands and just like, how would you respond in this moment? I think generally we are all moment to moment just being like, I have a choice in how I react to this.
I have seen some players playing Tales and New Tales cautioning other players, saying, hey, if you're in like a bad mood and you just want to make all the wrong choice, don't. It's not fun. Like, don't try and see how unfun you can make this with your bad decisions. Because guess what? It's going to be like life. Make a ton of bad decisions. The outcome's not great. It's not fun. Do you feel, Anthony, as a writer in an interactive narrative, a branching narrative, that you don't have to kill your darlings as much?
Really, you have to make more darlings. Like one of the really fun things about writing for Tales was I think I wrote a draft of the scene where Reese is pretending to be Vasquez and he goes onto the space station and has to talk his way past a couple of guards. I wrote that scene. And I think the first time I wrote it, one of the branches was really fun and like had a lot of really great little gags to, well, maybe not great. I'm okay. They were okay. It was fine. It was good. And the other ones you could tell I'd given less love to. And one of the things I was sort of told was like, every branch that you write needs to be your favorite branch. There shouldn't obviously be one that you're hoping players are going for. They all have to be darlings and special in their own way, which I thought was really, really cool and really interesting. And it pushes you harder as a writer to care about different executions of a scene. There's no one best way for this joke. Or if there is, there needs to be a completely different joke that's in the other branch. Or maybe not even a joke, but just a different tack where like, you know, as Vasquez, you can come in and immediately say, like, I'm your boss, I'm the authority, all of you have to listen to me. And it becomes about you trying to exert corporate influence. Whereas you can come in and say, like, hey, what's up, ladies? And then they go, like, we don't care for misogyny here. And then all of a sudden you're on the back foot. Now you're having to deal with the fact that you have lost influence in these people's eyes.
Do you find that if you have a favorite path, and you might want to beef up that path as the most fun, the most satisfying, but you have to do equal effort and due diligence to all the other potential paths?
I think for me, I mean, it's similar to what Anthony said. I think my approach is love the characters and be true to the characters in every moment that you take them through, right? So I think that's like, it has to feel honest for them, regardless of which branch you are taking, right? And so I think that was always the gut check for me, is do all of these options feel true to the character? Do they push the character forward in some way or challenge the character? And then, yeah, just maintaining who we think they are. So the headcanon for me has to be about, who are these people at their core?
And as long as you do that, then you've almost guaranteed a satisfying player experience as well.
Yeah, and then I don't have favorites, right? It's also just that
They're
I'm
all
trying
beautiful
to,
babies.
yeah, they're all honest.
Unlike with
right?
real children, it is impossible to pick a favorite.
Yeah. Let's talk about characters. Like Reese, for instance. How do you feel like as a protagonist, Reese fits into the Borderlands canon? How is he different than everyone else we've met who shows up with a gun in their hand?
Well, I think Telltale made a really interesting choice with Reese, which is that he's a dweeb. Like he is, his ultimate goal is not something that's necessarily as aspirational for the player, because he just wants to be the head of the corporate ladder, which like most people don't, when they pick up a video game, want to be like, I want to get to the head of the corporate ladder in this video
It's not
game.
Corporation Simulator.
Right, exactly. But you got to relate to his aspirations and the idea that, oh, his boss sucks. The fact that his boss sucks is more relatable. You're like, I want to get one over on Vasquez, so I will therefore relate to Reese. But Reese as a whole is kind of cowardly, kind of whiny, kind of doesn't know what he's doing at any given time, and is dependent on the women around him to sort of solve a lot of his problems for him. But when that's contextualized the right way, and when he comes up against the right antagonists, it can still be fun to be him. And then it's even more fun to be Fiona next to him and be making fun of him.
Fiona and Reese have very different personalities. Fiona's is it safe to say, as a sort of city-level con artist, is she that different? Are her goals that different than Reese's? They are both trying to climb a certain kind of ladder of power and wealth.
Yeah, that was the idea, was to thematically sort of mirror them in terms of they're both trying to get out of their station and rise above who they were. The difference is that Reese's consequences are like, I might have to be a janitor, and Fiona's consequences are, I might die.
Right.
So she has actually a lot more life experience than he does, even though he feels like he's really important.
That's a nice opinion on privilege, right?
Yes.
We're fighting for the same thing, except your thing is not really important, and my thing is survival.
Yeah.
In terms of relationships, Lynn, how do you feel about the Fiona and Sasha Felix dynamic in Tales? I know that these characters, Fiona and Sasha, continue to live on through Borderlands, but there is a family dynamic in Tales that's, I don't know, pretty messed up, but born out of found family gone right, gone wrong, you know?
And I can really only speak to that relationship from a fan perspective.
Sure.
But like more broadly, I think those themes that you just identified are pretty common in most Borderlands content, right? The found family. So even in New Tales, you know, there's with Anu and Octavio, they are adopted siblings. And we don't really get into the background of that in New Tales, but we establish, you know, that they didn't have an easy upbringing either. And then clearly Fran and Louis become found family in this dynamic as well. So it's people in the Borderlands is a harsh place. It's hard to survive. And so you do kind of have to find the people to rally beside. And I think that's a general theme.
It's a way to live too. I mean, it's not a bad way to live. You know, it's not a bad lesson. It's like the full quote, you know, it's not blood is thicker than water. It's the blood of the bond is thicker than the water of the womb. It's found family. Borderlands as the Borderlands as a harsh place. I mean, that kind of, you know, it could mirror any aspect of modern life. These people are striving for things that we strive for. There are people on the streets trying to survive. There are people wasting their lives climbing corporate ladders for nothing but wealth. There are people trying to change their circumstances. These guys just happen to be in space, and there's robots everywhere. So in a way, it's extremely relatable.
Aptly put. Yeah.
Speaking of robots everywhere, Gortys as a character, voiced by Ashley Johnson, is this our Is this our child that we're saving? Is this our friend that we are elevating? Where does, in the pantheon of characters that we have to encounter in Borderlands games, where does Gortys fit in?
I think she's both. One of the initial goals with Gortys was, can we do Claptrap but likable? And it turns out, yeah, if you cast Ashley Johnson as your robot, the robot is going to be very charming and very likable and very adorable.
I think the video game community as a whole wants to just save Ashley Johnson. So you hear her voice and you immediately go into
You're like, I'll do anything for this person.
I will kill everyone to save you.
Yeah, Gortys is very much your lovable sidekick who's actually lovable and somebody you want to hang out with.
Speaking of Claptrap but lovable, the mystery Vault Hunter.
Yeah, that was a gag that Telltale had a lot of fun with, because one of the things that we were talking about, what is Borderlands necessary? What is something that you have to see when you go into a Borderlands game? And we were sort of like, I guess Claptrap's one of those things, but also, do you really want to be interacting with Claptrap a lot? Do you want to have deal with him in a story? Do we want to force him on the player? And the idea of rewarding the most loyal player who's found the most money and has done the most choices and stuff, can actually afford the mystery Vault Hunter, and giving them that wet fart of a surprise that is Claptrap, I think was the perfect execution. I think they did such a great job.
Vault Hunters, do you live with regret? Do you lie awake every night thinking about every wrong choice you've ever made, every game you didn't play when you had the chance? Of course you do. You're only human. You're flawed. That's why Gearbox and 2K are offering a new bundle that contains every Borderlands game to date for one great price. It's called the Borderlands Collection Pandora's Box, and it's available now on Xbox, PlayStation, and PC. All the games are included, so there's no choice to make and no regrets afterwards. If just one thing in your whole rotten life can go right, this is probably it. Let's talk about bringing back Handsome Jack. Is it a cop-out? Is it?
I think so. Okay, so Telltale did this thing that one of their big things was a lot of user research before they did a game. And they would basically reach out to a bunch of people and be like, hey, when you think of brand X, what comes to mind?
Handsome Jack.
And yeah, when they did Borderlands, one of the things in a post-Borderlands 2 environment was Handsome Jack rose to the top of the list. So they went, okay, can we bring him back, but not necessarily bring him back to life? Can he be an angel or a devil on the shoulder of one of our characters? And we really like that idea. We're like, oh yeah, we definitely don't want to like do some like somehow Handsome Jack survive kind of thing, but having him be a voice in essentially the player's ear and a confidant and a Jiminy Cricket, but an evil Jiminy Cricket, I think is actually how we referred to him, gave the player a lot of interesting choice space to navigate. Because like if you find yourself agreeing with Handsome Jack, you're like, is this the right move? Should I actually be doing this if I'm agreeing with the bad guy? But on the other hand, if Handsome Jack's a character you really liked and want to spend more time around, you get to go on a bunch of mandates with Handsome Jack, and that's fun too.
Handsome Jack in Borderlands 2 is actively trying to manipulate all players and all NPCs and the world and everything all at once. In Tales, he's trying to manipulate one guy.
Yep.
How does that change his approach to manipulation, or does it?
I think it makes it more personal. I think Handsome Jack tries to go out of his way to be a little bit more of your friend. I mean, granted, the first thing he does when he comes back to life is try to strangle you.
Right.
But after that, I think one of the really interesting things about the context in which he comes back is that he knows he has no power other than making Reese like him enough to essentially plug him into his body voluntarily. So
it's a long con.
It's a long con. Yeah, everything he's doing is to make Reese like him a little bit more. But even then, he can't help being Handsome Jack, and it's still like, oh my God, you should just kill these people. Why are you even talking to them? So it actually got to the point where Jack seduced me as the writer. So the original draft of the scene where you rip Jack out of your eye, I wrote. And I wrote it wrong. Like I wrote it as like Handsome Jack feeling bad for the things that he'd done, and actually he was a good person and all this stuff and blah blah blah. And Telltale took it and was like, this is all wrong. He needs to still be a Handsome Jack and be a villain and be somebody who wanted to take you over and all that kind of stuff. I was like, oh my God, you're right. And they rewrote it to what it is in the game now, and it's a million times better. But it just sort of, to me, showed how seductive as a character Handsome Jack can be, because he's a casual guy. He's your friend. He just wants to talk shit about other people. But at the end of the day, he's still a megalomaniac and a jerk. In
that scene in particular, his last impotent act is to lunge at you.
Yeah.
With no body and no agency and no ability to. So it's sort of similar to what we talked about for Borderlands 2, is till the very last second, it seems like he thinks there's a way out. or an impotent rage that he has to get out at the end.
Yeah, because he thinks he's the hero, and heroes don't lose their stories.
There's also one of the most viscerally upsetting scenes of any Borderlands game, which is where Reese tugs the implant out of his eyeball, and there's just enough give that it looks like it sucks.
Yeah, there's a couple of really good eye trauma moments in this series. There's also pulling the Colonel's eye out, like at the spoon, I think. Or no, you just do it with your hand. And Athena later on being like, why do you have an eye in your pocket? Which was a gag I really liked.
Lynn, have you ever gotten to write something for a Borderlands game that on that level made you go, Gah?
No, I don't think so. Now I'm like, I wish. Not yet.
Put it in the plan.
Not yet. But it's one of those things, like when you were writing it versus when like our incredible team, the art team, just takes it from words and then presents it back to you, and you're like, I retract that. Or, like, it's grosser than I imagined.
Is it hey, I wrote this in one sentence, make it as gross. The note is, make it as gross as you want. And then they do, and you go, oh no. Oh, not that
I underestimated you.
Oh, dear. I feel like that speaks to everyone at every level of the process really loving what they're creating, though. Where if is my job, I mean, we've talked to people on this podcast whose job it is to make bigger, grosser, more horrifying, more visceral, more monstrous things in a game. Well, you do that for a while, and that's your quality bar. Like your review, your boss is saying, "Man, your gross stuff's not gross enough." You know,
it was one of the upsides we got of following Walking Dead, because they did horrible things in Walking Dead to their characters, and they were like, "Well, how can we do something a little bit more horrifying in a different way for Tales?"
When we finish Jack's story in Tales, have we finished Jack's story? I mean, do we feel like Jack dies in BL2? AI Jack is ambiguously dealt with depending on player choices in Tales.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to bring AI Jack back that branches off of just those particular choices, or do you have to leave Tales as ambiguous canon?
Well, I think one of the things is that you can, if you're the holders of the canon, you can decide which elements of Tales were canon. But I remember intentionally being like, to Telltale, hey, there needs to be an option where Handsome Jack is dead, and never coming back. Because we wanted to avoid... We didn't want him to be the Joker. We didn't want him to get away and then come back every so often. And like this franchise is now about clashing with Handsome Jack every once in a while. We wanted Borderlands to be bigger than Handsome Jack. So if you like him and you want him to stick around, cool. You can keep the little eye implant and not crush it. But if you want him dead, you crush it.
Right.
And to me, I think if I was to write a story for Reese after that, I would probably say that Reese crushed it, because that's the ultimate reaching of his character arc. Is I want to be Handsome Jack to realizing I need to destroy Handsome Jack.
Not following Reese from that moment immediately, is that his sort of come to Jesus moment? If he crushes Handsome Jack, is that him on a new path, or is that just one good decision after a bunch of varying decisions?
I think the interesting thing is it depends on how you play. So like my version of Reese that's my favorite is, so there's a big choice you can make where you can let Handsome Jack into your psyche so that he can control all the turrets and kill a bunch of people that are threatening Fiona and Sasha. Or you can not do that and take a riskier route that doesn't let Handsome Jack into your brain. And if you let Handsome Jack into your brain, then Handsome Jack also screws up everything on Helios and shuts it down. And as far as Fiona and Sasha can hear, Reese did all those things, and he did it voluntarily alongside Handsome Jack. To me, that's the better, or at least my preferred version of that story, which then makes the moment where he's like, I need to divorce myself from Handsome Jack and rip out the eyeball that much more powerful, because he got what he wanted. He got to be Handsome Jack for a little while,
right,
and realizes, I don't actually want this. In terms of the story circle, one of the big parts of the story circle is get what you want, but pay a horrible price for it. And that's
you'd have to realize you were a true psychopath if you got that and
like, oh, I'm chill with this. Yeah, exactly.
This is a great way to live.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, not just with Tales and New Tales, but a franchise as a whole, I think we're always endeavoring to expand Borderlands. Lynn, what is a Vault Hunter without the tight gameplay loops that Borderland is known for, the looting and shooting? What does it mean to be a Vault Hunter when you can tell these different kinds of stories?
I think one of the big things about wanting to be a Vault Hunter or being a Vault, like there's the aspiration of that thing itself, right? So because the world the universe of Borderlands knows what a Vault Hunter is. But if you look at like how big our universe actually is, despite having 4 of them per mainline game, Vault Hunters are pretty rare, right? They're not everywhere. So what it takes to be a Vault Hunter, to choose that path and then to actualize it, is pretty rare, and it stands for something, I think, against the bleakness of that universe, right? We rarely know what's in the vault or what the consequences will be for opening it. So
do you feel like it's a choice to be sort of to live a life of heroic aspiration, whether that's how it turns out or not?
In some ways, yes. I think in other ways, it's the effort to change one's standing, right? And I think that's what it ultimately means to me, is that every vault is an opportunity.
Do you think it's an any means necessary lifestyle? I've got what I've got and I want better. It's not necessarily I want more, but I want better. I want to raise myself out of my circumstances. I want to in some ways, elevate myself and my friends, depending on who we're talking about.
I think it depends on the Vault Hunter, right?
Yeah.
And I think, to go back to character, I think every one of the Vault Hunters has gotten into the vault hunting profession for different reasons, right? And why they would keep doing it, or why they might retire from it and decide, I did it. Right.
Those that retire, I feel like you could almost go, "Hey, why aren't you doing it?" "Oh, right, I was there. I saw what you did. You don't need to do anymore. That was rough. that was a hard life."
Often Vault Hunters sort of like they save the world in spite of themselves.
Sure.
Right. Like more than they are not. I would say very few Vault Hunters are actually on what we would call the hero's journey. Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know that they consider themselves heroic people.
We do find a lot of them, after experiencing, countless trauma-inducing events in a very short amount of time, do try and, I think, find that quiet life. What am I good at when I'm not thinking about killing? Like, what am I good at when I'm not saving a planet or people or destroying a monster? Maybe I'll, open up a little shop. Maybe I'll do a little side hustle. Maybe I'll open an Etsy. Who knows?
Yeah, and I do think, again, we hunt vaults in the Tales series, but it is, again, too, about like what the other side of life. Right.
That's actually a really good point, is that we are vault hunting in the Tales series, just not with looting and shooting.
Right. And we're not, as Anthony's already said, we're at level 0, level 1. Right. These are not seasoned vault hunters.
It's almost like you want someone to step in and go, "You're not qualified for this."
Exactly.
You guys should leave it to the pros. Moving beyond Tales, there are more stories to tell, more characters that you aren't finished with. Lynn, you've already talked about Fran. Fran is a character that exists in multiple Borderlands releases. Fran has a past and a future in the Borderlands franchise. What was it about Fran specifically that made her a great candidate for main character in New Tales?
So I think, right, again, Fran is mentioned very barely in Borderlands 3, and it's part of she runs a Frogurt shop, and that Frogurt shop is hit by a Malawan laser, right? And it became that moment to kind of focus in and say, like, as when in Marvel movies or here DC, like the heroes are fighting and they're destroying an entire city, right? Like there are people that are damaged by that, even if there's an ultimate sort of victory out of it. And to zoom in on that. Like, we can do that by zooming in on Fran and just saying, here's this person that, like, their livelihood was diminished and taken away because of something they had nothing to do with, right? She was not part of that. She was punished simply because Reese really liked the chocolate dill pickle Frogurt. And does that give her a grudge? Absolutely, right? Does she have reason to kind of be upset?
Do you want to show the player? Oh yeah. Do you want to show the player their place in that arc? Like, for instance, if it's you pressed the button to fire the laser, and then later it's like, look what you did, jerk.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is part of it, right? Is you just say, like, yeah, you were off running this huge, Vault Hunter campaign across all of these planets, but these are the repercussions of those things, right? Like, because a Telltale style game is about choices having consequences, why not start with a choice?
Big consequences, yeah.
And then focus in on, like, here's the consequence. It was this person's livelihood. Now we're going to make you sit with how she's feeling with it. And then now you inhabit Fran and you kind of get to decide what her arc is. Does she give in to her rage and her frustration? Or does she come to terms with it? Does she learn how to channel her rage into, like, effective outcomes?
When I was researching for this episode, I came across not just one, but one that really stuck out. Review from a disabled game reviewer who saw Fran. Honestly, even it mentioned specifically that even the trailer was like a giddy moment of, this is a character who uses a mobility assistive device, who that's not her thing. That's not all she is. It's not even in the description of her character. How important is that, or did you feel a responsibility to do that correctly? Tell me about that.
Absolutely. We had a lot of discussions about that early on. And generally speaking, I think one of our pillars within the franchise is that the people in the Borderlands universe are who they are. And we don't necessarily always want to bring the politics of Earth over to that universe, right? There is no reason to have to overly focus on the fact that Fran uses a mobility device. She simply does, right? Yeah. And she's
there's an interesting contrast there, because we have so many characters with bionics and cybernetics and robot arms, robot eyeballs, that most gamers would go, cool. But that's another disabled person using an assistive device. So
true. Yeah. And it's everywhere. It takes all different forms, even in the opening of new tales, right? Like Octavio says good morning to somebody with a leg that has a flamethrower at the end of it, right? And it's just, again, it's not abnormal. And that people are walking around with cybernetics of some kind, Reese included.
Yeah.
But we also talked a lot about, because in New Tales there is the Anahatium, the green shard, and that it does not heal Fran, right? Fran does not need to be healed or fixed. And so that was another thing that we were talking about before we started writing and determining her arc. It was important to us.
Was there a decision to make Fran very sexual based on how you do not normally see that from a disabled character? Or is it just what you wanted to do?
I just thought it'd be fun to make her horny.
Yeah.
I was writing Fran, I think, and I was like, it'd be fun if she was horny. I like writing horny dialogue. And so she was horny. And lo, she was horny.
And lo, the angel spoke and she was horny. In terms of additional representation. We play out the arc of the character lore in this. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So, and this sort of comes back to another question that we were chatting about before, is when we meet lore in BL3, it's in very different circumstances, right? Lore is in this corporate takeover and has had to put his passions aside, right? His passions for brewing really good coffee, right? Aside, right?
Hey, that's a character that only wants to help people.
Right, right. And so there's that aspect of Promethea as a planet is now beyond this moment and trying to recover itself and kind of get back to regular business. So what would lore be doing, right? So the first answer to that, lore is running his coffee shop and is good friends with Fran. But the other part of this is in Borderlands 3, there is an echo log that we hear lore talking about the desire to transition, and that can't happen until all of the corporate war takeover battle is done, right? So it is a dream deferred for the moment. But now we're in New Tales, we are past that. So we got to explore we got to take lore through transition.
And that's that journey is it's mirrored so often in modern life, where people are putting those dreams on hold for bureaucratic reasons, for job reasons, for what state they live in reasons, for what rights they happen to have, based on their geographic location reasons. We just show that lore made it where he wanted to be. Do you feel like there is a story between when we first meet lore and then when we see lore in New Tales that is worth exploring in the future? Or do you think that it's is it all said? Like, is everything that we need to know, lore is where he wants to be, and that's good enough for us?
I think, well, with any character, there's always more to explore in their background, in their future, in their present. But lore is also more than his transition or his gender, right?
Right.
So it is also true, again, that what transition looks like in the Borderlands universe is going to be different, sort of like by virtue of the technology,
Yeah.
right? And again, the politics and problems of Earth don't necessarily have to translate over to Borderlands. Some surely do, but like the fact that we don't have to put that on lore.
Anthony, do you find that when you're dealing with those very real world, modern, and potentially political issues, but you put them in the setting of the Borderlands world, I get the impression that it's like we don't have time to care about stuff about like what people are doing, how they live their lives. There's bigger things going on. Is that on purpose? Is that a way to say once you stop thinking about minutia and bullshit, you can focus on things that actually matter? You're not trying to police people's pronouns. You're not trying to police people's gender. You're worried about the giant space laser or the big monster or the vault or whatever.
I don't know if I'd phrase it that way entirely. I think gender in your expression can be a very big deal. Like I think it's important to lore. As Lynn was saying, lore is more than just their pronouns or in his gender. But I think the way that we wanted to write it, or the way that we want to look at it, is almost in a utopian kind of way, where it's like everyone accepts lore for who lore is. There's never going to be a transphobic joke at lore's expense, in the same way that there's never going to be a body shaming joke at Fran's expense.
Right.
And being able to write stories where the characters are accepted for who the characters are, and people can hate the characters for whatever reason, but they're hating them for who they are inside, and not because of some external thing.
Right.
We basically want Borderlands universe to be a place where prejudice doesn't exist, where people can want to eat you, but they're not going to say something like racist.
That's interesting. It's almost the Schitt's Creek of space.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We've touched on this before, but the ending of New Tales, 5 possible endings that are established or available depending on the bond established between the major characters. That is a different approach, even from Tales to New Tales. Do you feel? It's almost like I'm wondering, should there be a warning at the beginning that it's like, hey, be nice or don't, but that's really going to matter for who you're nice to or who you're not nice to. Like
we do kind of warn you diegetically as early as possible via Louis, right? Where your skateboard score, frankly, is his way to comment on how people or how the team is getting along interpersonally, or how aligned
it's a
they
vibe
are.
check.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
So that's the diegetic means to do it. But at the same time, and Anthony might disagree with me on this, but it was something I really, other than that moment, didn't want to put too much focus on, again, because you want people to make choices in these games and see the consequences through. Gaming the narrative and just being like, oh no, that was a bad choice, I'm going to go back, right? And I'm going to replay it and pick the good choice, because we didn't want there to be, this is a bad choice, this is a good choice. They're all just choices, and you want to kind of play that out and see where it goes. So that was my perspective, is that I didn't want to be too heavy-handed with the character name will remember this, which is basically the game telling you, now the system is tracking that choice, right? A save has just taken place in the background, right? And
there's a subtlety to it.
Right, so that you don't know which choices you're making are the ones that we're tracking, and to put some mystery behind that. As in life.
It is. You rarely get a green light or a red light when you have an interaction with somebody. You have to go on your gut feeling of how well it went and what it's going to mean for the future.
Exactly.
Anthony, you're writing a novel right now, set in this story timeline.
Yep.
Tell me everything about it. What's it called?
It's called Debt or Alive. I think it's Borderlands: Debt or Alive, which the title was come up with by Sam Winkler. And yeah, so it's basically, it takes place at the very end of Tales from the Borderlands. The second that Reese and Fiona open the vault, that's where Tales from the Borderlands ends, and Dead or Alive happens literally 5 seconds afterward. It tells you what they saw when they went in the vault, and basically what they get in the vault is essentially endless riches, and it becomes a story about Fiona and Sasha suddenly not having to be on the run, not having to fight for their lives every 2 seconds, but actually experiencing what they've always wanted, hypothetically, which is infinite wealth and infinite leisure. And so them then slowly realizing that actually the leisure that they're experiencing, being billionaires, is maybe not actually the right thing to do with their lives, and they sort of have to deal with the fact that, like, Fiona wants to keep Sasha safe because Fiona just saw her sister die. Sasha wants to go out and do more vault hunting because vault hunting was really fun and that's what they're made for. And they sort of come to conflict over that, and eventually it involves the fate of the world that they're on, and a big fight and jokes, lots of jokes, hopefully.
Did you pick Fiona and Sasha as the main characters because it was their story you wanted to tell, or did you write this story and they're the ones that fit it?
No, I wanted to do with Fiona and Sasha. We got to see so much of Reese in New Tales and in Borderlands 3, and players who played Tales and Borderlands, myself included, loved Fiona and Sasha and wanted to know what was going on with them and wanted to see more of them. And the idea of getting to write a Fiona and Sasha adventure was really exciting, and also really difficult, because when you're writing, and I'm sure the people who wrote Reese and BL3 and Tales had to experience this as well, but when you're writing a character in a linear medium in which they were previously introduced to the player in a non-linear medium, it's like, well, which Fiona are you getting from chapter to chapter? I had to sort of just decide on like, well, it's going to be my Fiona. It's going to be my kind of cocky Fiona that was always in over her head and always overconfident about stuff most of the time. And then sometimes Fiona goes into the other rail of her personality, which is like really worried about protecting her sister and really, anxious about that kind of stuff.
Having had such specific examples of how this character reacts with this stimulus or how they could react with each stimulus, does that inform you when writing them in a novel?
Yeah, I think so, because you're basically getting to, so one of the things that Telltale was really clever about, Jake Rodkin and Sean Vanneman, who were the sort of the minds behind the original Walking Dead thing, the Walking Dead episodic series. They were like, when you're making choices as Lee, we're not giving you infinite choices. The choice is not, hey, do you want to kill Kenny right now because he said something rude? Because that's not something Lee would do. You're seeing the different, kind of what Lynn was saying, like, on a good day, Lee would do this. On a bad day, Lee might do this, and on a neutral day, he might do this. You're seeing the rails of what a character can be. That was one of the things when it came to characterizing any of the playable characters. We talked about what are their rails. What is the most aggressive version of Fiona look like, and what is the most peaceful version of Fiona look like? So there's still a core to that character that is consistent. Reese is always going to be a dweeb. Fiona is always going to be a rough and scrabble con artist. But the expressions of those, like Fiona's never going to like stop a conversation by shooting somebody in the head because she got offended by what they said. But she will trick somebody into giving up all of their money and leave them in the desert to die or something like that.
Does her perspective change about who deserves to be conned once she has all the money in the world?
Yeah, kind of. Because she realizes basically she doesn't need to be a con artist. One of the things that the book sort of deals with is like everything in her is about trying to survive, and con artistry was just her method of survival. She found out that she was better at talking people out of their money rather than shooting them, and all of a sudden she doesn't need to do that stuff anymore. And she's like, well, what do I do with my day? Like I guess I should just hang out and live in luxury, and then
buy a bunch
eventually
of jet skis.
Buy a bunch of jet skis, and then eventually realizes like, oh no, there's actually a cost to that, which is that all the people have to build my jet skis, and people have to clean my mansion, and people have to cook my food, and those people are getting paid absolutely nothing, and that seems really unfair. And sort of the realization that like, oh, once you get to the top, you got there by stepping on a bunch of other people, even if you didn't realize it, and she sort of has to have her moral compass fight with her desire to keep her sister and her safe and in comfort. And she sort of ultimately decides, I guess I'm spoiling the book, but not really.
No,
it's not really a spoiler.
No, don't tell me.
It's not really a spoiler.
Okay.
It's just, she sort of has to make a decision between social justice and financial equity versus selfishness, and she's a good person.
It's the struggle of our time.
Yeah.
Let's move on to trivia. The idea for Tales was born out of the 2012 Spike Video Game Awards, when the Telltale table and the Gearbox table were near each other. Mm-hmm. And I guess everyone just kind of over chicken and whatever side dish, maybe like a rice, decided that this would be really fun. Claptrap had already appeared in Telltale's Poker Night 2.
Yeah.
So my first question to you both is, in Borderlands 3, what picture can be found on Reese's desk at Atlas HQ?
Sasha.
Yep.
His girlfriend, kind of, maybe.
You didn't let Lynn have a chance to buzz in. She's on a delay.
Yeah. That's how I win.
Let's see.
Sasha!
Beep. There are a lot of weapons and gear that are found in the game that are referenced to previous games. The stranger that captures Reese and Fiona at the start of the game is wielding a legendary weapon from Borderlands 2. Does anyone know what it is?
I think it's the Skull Crusher.
I
don't know then.
It's the conference call.
Oh, sure.
The Skull Crusher, Skull Masher sniper rifle is used by multiple bandits in the game, even though it's a legendary weapon.
They were really lucky bandits.
And my last...
It's definitely not because we had one model to give them.
Yeah, it was just totally on purpose. This first Tales episode was played live in a movie theater. Anthony, you were there.
Yeah.
And we found out that our producer, April, was there as well.
Yeah.
And you didn't know each other.
Didn't know each other.
What was that like? What was it like seeing that on the big screen?
It was one of the best experiences of my life. It was so fun having an audience full of people just shout like, call him Greaseface or whatever. And then the Alamo had even made a special Borderlands-centric drink menu, so you could get like a Mr. Torg milkshake, and I was just like, oh my God. Even having shipped Borderlands 2, I didn't feel like this was a real thing that people cared about. But hearing an audience full of people scream at something that you helped make, and seeing the little drink menu, it was like, oh my God, this is real. People, this actually means something to people, and it was one of the fondest memories of my life.
That's awesome. Lynn, do you have any memories of real life interactions or experiences where people came up to you because of possibly the representation in New Tales, that it meant something to them, they shared it with you?
When we announced and did a little bit of playthrough of New Tales at PAX, that was a moment when people approached me. I also think, though, and I was so touched, right? It meant a lot to me too, as a parent of a trans child. That representation. I also Fran was at PAX. The actress who played Fran was at PAX, and I know quite a few people came up and spoke to her as well. But also, like, we have to remember that New Tales was also a game made in a pandemic, and I still don't go outside much. So,
Right.
Also part of this is I haven't gotten to have as much interaction.
That's true. We haven't done cons. Like, that just hasn't been a
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So I just wanted to shout that out and be like, oh no, that was it was a pandemic, a written and mocap performance kept all during a pandemic. So PAX was really one of the first times we were out in the world.
Yeah, and we should probably stay inside from what I've been reading. So.
I like it in here.
Thanks for joining us, Vault Hunters. If you want Reese to destroy the Handsome Jack AI, press X and subscribe to the audio version of Echoes from the Borderlands wherever podcasts are available. If you want him to keep the AI Jack for future nefarious use, press A and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/GearboxOfficial, and see future episodes. If you play video games and you'd like to get every current Borderlands game at one great price, go snag our new bundle, the Borderlands Collection Pandora's Box, available now on Xbox, PlayStation, and PC. Huge thanks to my guests Lynn Joyce, Anthony Birch, as well as our behind-the-scenes heroes April Johnson, Dakota Warren, Matthew Ward, and Mike Cosner. Our theme song is Get Out of My Head by Wandermine. For Echoes from the Borderlands, I'm Joel Watson. See you next time, Vault Hunters.